why did he choose that this is suddenly the sort of thing that he chalks up to a youthful indiscretion when some of the people in this chat were like a year or two younger than him? He's 41.
Hard to say. Have to ask him. I'll tell you, did not defend it. I mean, the head of Young Republicans.
Right.
They exiled these folks right away. We took swift action, and I appreciate that accountability. I'm not going to defend it. I didn't even read some of these tweets, but they sound. I've heard they're bad, and I believe it. I bet a lot of these guys are the same people who troll me online for the most part. So I guarantee it's a lot of the same.
In today's video, Abby Phillip absolutely destroys Dan Crenshaw in a heated debate on Newsnight with Abby Phillip. This exchange gets tense fast because Abby Phillip isn't just challenging Dan Crenshaw's talking points, she's exposing how dangerous it is to minimize blatant racism as just edgy jokes. While Dan Crenshaw tries to pivot and soften the issue, Abby Phillip cuts through the noise, reminding everyone that hate speech, even in private, shapes public behavior and policy. She's not letting him off easy, and honestly, she shouldn't. So let's dive in and watch how Abby Phillip shuts down Dan Crenshaw on Newsnight with Abby Phillip.
Joining us at the table is Camille Foster. He's the editor-at-large at Tangle. Camille, what do you make of what she said there and how it relates to this conversation about the liberty and the freedom with which these guys thought that they could spew this kind of stuff without any kind of consequences?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, Abby, first and foremost. I have a lot of issues with the conversation around this particular story. I would tend to agree the comments in the thread ought to be condemned universally. But this is like kind of what you would expect, this kind of idiot, LARPing, edgelord nonsense inside of a private group chat. I think the words you used a moment ago, that they think they could say this sort of thing risk-free, consequence-free. Well, they were saying it in private. And I'm sure they were saying different things in public. Do they mean these things authentically? In some cases, they almost certainly do. There has been a resurgence of white nationalist sentiment in this country. I think it's interesting, though, to try to trace this back and to think honestly about how we got to here. And I do think that a lot of the renewed interest in race and identity things for both noble purposes and otherwise has actually helped to create the circumstances that we see now. That is not erasing any of the responsibility that people have for embracing and endorsing these kinds of sentiments, even in private group chats where they're doing this kind of idiotic locker room talk. They deserve to face consequences. But I do think that J.D. Vance's comments about this are worth actually focusing in on for a moment. This has shades of that whole eating the cats, eating the dogs nonsense from during the campaign cycle.
I mean, he would know all about that.
He is a capable spokesperson for this administration, and I mean that as both a compliment and a dig, in the sense that he seems willing to go out and defend just about anything. It's weird, the places where they decide to draw the lines. I'm not sure why they decide to draw it here. I do think the hypocrisy he's underscoring, though, is real.
I know why,
as well.
because I've seen the places where these comments have been defended. And I think J.D. Vance is looking down the line at 2028, and he's looking at who he's calling kids right now are going to be the Republican operatives and the sort of the future of the Republican Party. And I think he's lining himself up. But you make an important point. The comments in the group chat are terrible and stupid, but I find it way more interesting that J.D. Vance has chosen to defend it than these guys that nobody knows or cares about.
You can really see in this exchange that Abby Phillip isn't just challenging Camille Foster's ideas, she's forcing him to confront the moral blind spot in his argument. Camille Foster tries to frame the racist comments as harmless edgelord nonsense in a private chat, but Abby Phillip reminds him racism doesn't disappear just because it happens in private, and that's what makes this so powerful. Camille Foster uses big picture talk about freedom and context, but Abby Phillip cuts through the noise. She points out that even when hate speech hides behind irony or privacy, it still fuels a culture that normalizes discrimination. What really stands out is how Abby Phillip handles the hypocrisy around J.D. Vance. She highlights how his selective outrage reveals a deeper issue, that political leaders are quick to defend those who mirror their base's uglier instincts, while pretending it's all youthful indiscretion. Camille Foster tries to intellectualize it, but Abby Phillip grounds it in accountability and empathy. She brings it back to real-world consequences. By the end, Camille Foster looks like he's just defending contradictions, while Abby Phillip is the only one demanding moral consistency. She doesn't let whataboutism water down the truth. She keeps the focus where it belongs, on responsibility, not excuses.
Why did he choose that this is suddenly the sort of thing that he chalks up to a youthful indiscretion when some of the people in this chat were like a year or two younger than him? He's 41.
Hard to say. Have to ask him. I'll tell you, did not defend it. I mean, the head of Young Republicans.
Right.
They exiled these folks right away. We took swift action, and I appreciate that accountability. I'm not going to defend it. I didn't even read some of these tweets, but I've heard they're bad, and I believe it. I bet a lot of these guys are the same people who troll me online for the most part. So I guarantee it's a lot of the same folks. On the other hand, why you're seeing some Republicans shrug their shoulders, I mean, I'll tell you why. Here's what they would here's their sentiment. We just watched Charlie Kirk get shot in the neck. You know, we watched our president, while he was campaigning, almost get killed. A bullet whizzed by his head. So there's real violence, and then there's this disgusting, despicable stuff that is said in private. And like, it is disgusting, despicable. You're not going to see me try and defend it. But I'll give you that perspective from some people who might feel that way.
Ashley?
Look, I think what happened to Charlie Kirk was awful. I said it. I think an assassination attempt on anybody, including the then candidate, Trump, and now president. It's awful. I also think that there's a different conversation, right? So I don't take any comfort that this is done in private, because if you say the N-word in private, you think it in public. And that means that at some point in my life, I may be sitting across somebody who thinks I'm the N-word. And so that person may be the person who has to give me a job one day, or is a police officer that pulls me over one day, despite being articulate, or he knows what I'm talking about.
Gets the call back.
Is that an inside joke?
It is inside. It's between me and the brother.
You gotta watch the show to know
You gotta
what she's talking
watch
about.
Table
Anyway,
of Five last time we were on together.
Right.
But that's what I mean, and that was what it manifests. It means that could be somebody's teacher one day. Or it means that could be somebody's congressperson one day. And what am I supposed to think as a Black American, as a person who could be called the N-word, now I think it's great that the young Republicans push folks out. And I also think it's important on the left when we say, or not we, because I don't do that, but when people say terrible things, that those things be condemned. And that's what I was saying earlier, is like, we got to call balls and strikes.
Yeah.
But there's something bigger than it's just being private. These people live their lives publicly every day. And if you walk through your life and you don't know somebody thinks you're a watermelon person, or that you should be raped to the point of suicide, what are we?
You can really tell in this exchange that Abby Phillip and Ashley Allison are done with the excuses. Dan Crenshaw tries to spin the conversation by saying that some Republicans are shrugging off the racist group chat because they've experienced real violence, pointing to incidents like the shooting at Charlie Kirk or the attempt on Donald Trump's life. But that's a complete deflection. Violence and racism aren't competing issues. They're both dangerous, and one doesn't justify ignoring the other. Ashley Allison brings it back to reality in such a powerful way. She makes the point that when someone uses the N-word in private, it still reflects who they are in public, because that kind of hate doesn't just stay behind closed doors. It leaks into their decisions, their behavior, and how they treat people who don't look like them. She's talking about the real-world consequences. The boss who won't hire you, the police officer who pulls you over, the teacher shaping a kid's worldview. And that's not hypothetical, that's lived experience. What's brilliant about Abby Phillip's approach here is how she zooms out. She connects this isolated incident to a much bigger problem inside conservative spaces, where figures like Nick Fuentes, known for outright extremist views, still get platforms and attention instead of outright condemnation. That's not accidental. It's a reflection of where the lines of accountability have blurred. By the end of this exchange, Abby Phillip and Ashley Allison aren't just challenging Dan Crenshaw's talking points, they're exposing a deeper truth. When leaders downplay racism as a private mistake or a youthful slip-up, they're not just protecting bad behavior, they're normalizing it. And that's exactly how prejudice keeps its place in power.
Doing?
Well, there are people saying things like this in public, and some of these people are conservative adjacent, or they would perhaps just describe themselves as conservatives, like Nick Fuentes. And Nick Fuentes is a guy who has been on a number of prominent podcasts in recent weeks, who just today announced that he's got some major announcement and will be sitting down with some other conservative figure. Conservatives have to know that this is taking place in the ether right now.
I mean, I'm like,
and speaking out about this.
I'm like on the front lines of that
Yeah.
battle. I think
And
you probably know.
No, Congressman, I know you. I'm not directing this at you in
wouldn't
particular.
you
I'm just
say-
saying that
I mean,
we should be
would you
speaking out
say-
about
I mean, I have often argued that, this is not about canceling people, but just creating the boundaries of your movement. I mean,
Oh,
would
yeah,
you
totally.
say that
Totally.
Republicans need to establish?
Well, of course you're right.
I wrote a
Just,
book on
just
can- I
as,
wrote a-
just
literally
as
wrote a book on
Democrats
cancel
do.
culture.
I'm not excluding Democrats from this, but just
No,
as
no,
Democrats
you have
do.
freedom of association. Like if you say a bunch of nasty things and you're part of my organization, I have every right to kick you out.
You can really sense the shift here. The left panelists are making an essential point that goes beyond party lines. This isn't about cancel culture, it's about setting boundaries for your movement. And that's such an important distinction that often gets lost in these debates. When Abby Phillip or the other left-leaning voices talk about accountability, they're not saying ban everyone who disagrees. They're saying if you openly promote racism, hate, or extremism, you shouldn't be part of the same political space that claims to value democracy and decency. What's striking is that even Dan Crenshaw doesn't fully push back here because he knows they're right. Freedom of association doesn't mean freedom from consequences. If someone's words or actions clearly cross the line, organizations absolutely have the right to say, "You don't represent us." That's not censorship, that's leadership. And when Nick Fuentes gets brought up, it really highlights the problem. Here's a guy who has made openly extremist comments and still manages to find himself welcomed into certain conservative circles. That's the danger the left panelists are calling out. When you don't draw those boundaries, your movement starts to lose moral clarity. What they're essentially saying is this: if you let the loudest, most toxic voices define your side, then don't be surprised when those voices become the face of your movement. Accountability isn't about punishing speech, it's about protecting integrity, and that's something both parties should be doing, but it's especially urgent for conservatives right now. Pause. Are you getting tired of getting half the story from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite. How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, left, right, and center, are covering the same story. So you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights into media bias and political trends. Stay informed, think for yourself, and check out Ground News in the description down below.